The Winter Soldier has one of the most drastic character design evolutions in the history of Marvel Comics. He started out as a Boy Scout sidekick character in the 1940s and morphed into a brooding assassin in the early 2000s. Hit like, press subscribe because this is the comic evolution of James Buchanan Barnes, aka Bucky, aka the Winter Soldier. And for this one, folks, we gotta go all the way back to the very beginning of Marvel Comics. Before it was even called Marvel Comics, it was called Timely Comics in 1939. And the book we're going to first came out in 1941, and it's Captain America Comics #1, written and drawn by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, respectively. Now, this is one of the most expensive comic books that you could possibly get your hands on, because in April 2022, a 9.4 graded copy of this thing sold for over $3 million, and it holds the character that we're going to be talking about today, Bucky Barnes. Now, back in the day, he was just this teenage character. He was just this hapless little guy, happy to be alive, just running around an army base or whatever. He had these rosy cheeks and a domino mask, curly red hair, and his superhero uniform was very funny looking. I really appreciate it, but I can see how a lot of people would find it to be a little bit too cringe. This guy is an oh shucks, gee golly gosh kind of guy, and he looks just like it. But we also get him in a regular style army uniform where he tucks his tie in between the buttons or whatever. But when we take a look at his actual costume, he's kind of wearing like an army romper with a belt around the waist. Now, an army romper would be a very interesting style of garment that I don't really think exists in the real world. But Bucky Barnes is absolutely rocking it. He's got the red belt to cut it off in the middle, the yellow collar, the black domino mask, and the big gloves and boots. And ever since his very first issue, he's just shown throwing bad guys around, but also taking hits to the face. It is so strange to me that sometimes he's drawn without the romper. Like in this thing over here, it looks like he's just wearing a regular style army suit that just happens to be colored in primary colors. In this shot down here, where a bad guy is hitting Bucky in the face, it doesn't look like his top is connected to the little undies that would be worn below. But don't let that fool you. That's just Jack Kirby rushing his way through a comic book the way he does. I absolutely love Jack Kirby. But for some reason, Bucky Barnes standing in front of an American flag is one of the most badass things that I've seen this year. I know that it looks like a Boy Scout, doesn't look that brooding or badass, but for some reason, this picture right here is really resonating with me, and it really shows us what Bucky Barnes was supposed to look like when he was first designed. He's a small little teenage boy in the most hilarious uniform you ever done seen. As 1941 progressed, more issues of Captain America comics would come out, and in issue 2, Bucky Barnes is depicted exactly the same way he was in issue 1, but there are a couple panels of him in drag that I think are very cute. Here's Captain America and Bucky Barnes dressed up as ladies, holding hands with lollipops as they're infiltrating a Nazi base and they need to beat up some bad guys. So this was the best way to do it. And if you have this comic book, it's worth somewhere in the ballpark of $35,000. But the next issue, issue number 3, is worth even more than that, because this is the very first time that Stan Lee wrote for comic books. But don't get it twisted, he didn't write this comic book. He just wrote this 2-page spread, mostly all text with a couple illustrations by Jack Kirby. But this right over here, this is Stan Lee's debut into Marvel Comics. Now, this guy would go on to change, and some would say ruin comic books. That's an argument for another day. Me, personally, I like Stan Lee's writing style, but I just don't like how much credit he stole from other creators. But in this issue, issue 3, Bucky Barnes is still looking very similarly to the way that he always has since the very beginning of the series, but he's also shown in this more formal army attire over here, with the white shirt and the tie tucked in between the buttons. And that was how the world was introduced to Bucky Barnes during the golden age of comic books. Now, the golden age would continue on as the war raged on, and by the war, I mean World War II in the real world, which Jack Kirby, the writer of Captain America comics, would then go off and serve in. So that's right, Jack Kirby would write about the war with the involvement of Captain America, and then, as a strange twist of irony, he would have to play the role of Captain America in real life. But he wasn't like a super serum soldier or anything. The story of Jack Kirby in the army is a story for another day. Anyway, we gotta move on with the evolution of Bucky Barnes, so for that, we're gonna scoot all the way over to 1946 for All Winners Comics number 19. On the cover, Bucky Barnes is spread out over top of Captain America in what looks like some of the worst anatomy that I've ever seen drawn in comic books. Now, this is an era of comic books where anatomy wasn't really a strong point. A lot of these figures, a lot of these gestures look very silly. Just look at Namor down here. That is not the way a human body looks, but I love it. And I try to incorporate this style into my drawings because of how much I love it. All Winners number 19 was written by Bill Finger, who is actually the creator of Batman, who had to wrestle and fight for the creator credit of Batman, but ended up getting it. And if you get your hands on this comic book, you're probably going to be spending in the ballpark of $8,000, but we're not here to talk about dollar amounts. We're here to talk about Bucky Barnes, and Bucky Barnes isn't really featured so heavily in this book, just a little bit, but here he is on this opening splash page over here wearing white pants. It just looks to me that the colorist forgot to color his pants right here. So that's why we're getting this alternate character design, this alternate model with him wearing white pants, but I believe it's just because the colorist either forgot or was lazy, or just got pushed through, or there was a deadline. Either way, it doesn't look finished, and I love that about comic books, that they could go out the door and onto newsstands unfinished without any sort of quality control. And by this time in our timeline in 1946, the World War is already over, so the public isn't rallying behind Captain America as much as they did during the war. And in 1948, Captain America number 66 came out, and this would be an issue where Bucky Barnes gets shot and replaced. And on the cover, we see Bucky Barnes getting shot right here. They're not hiding it. They're not worried about spoiling this one bit. They're telling you right on the cover, this is what's gonna happen. Bucky Barnes is getting shot in the gut by this lady wearing this dress, who's drawn with absolutely no sense of anatomy, no sense of form or structure whatsoever. It looks like she's floating on the side of this car, but really she's holding on through the windows or whatever. It's just not a great drawing, but me, I love it. And I love all this dialogue on the cover as well. But if we look at Bucky Barnes, he looks exactly the same as he always did, with the red curly hair, the romper, the red tights, the big boots and gloves. You flip open the book and Bucky Barnes is getting shot again, but neither of these times that he's getting shot are actually the canon event of him getting shot. It's all very, very confusing. And at a time where Captain America was kind of waning in popularity, to kind of tell stories in this kind of backwards sort of way is why I think that this book has a mostly negative reception. Captain America number 66 was written by William Woolfolk with art by Alan Bellman, and this art is absolutely hideous. And I actually don't mean that in a bad way. I love the way that this art looks. And here we have the actual comic panels of the canon event where Bucky is getting shot. Captain America is distraught as Bucky Barnes takes a shell in the stomach. Captain America rushes over to a bloody and downed Bucky, picks him up, carries him away, but replaces them the next day with a woman named the Golden Girl. Now, I don't know why I haven't seen more of the Golden Girl, because looking at this design, I think that there's a lot of possibilities here, and I especially love how she has those Captain America wings on her cowl. This is a very cool looking superhero costume, and to be honest, I like her a whole lot more than Bucky Barnes, especially as a sidekick for Captain America. But we're not here to talk about Golden Girl, we're here to talk about Bucky Barnes, and this panel over here had me laughing for like a whole day. Look at how Bucky is depicted here. He looks like a 50-year-old, 5-year-old. I have no idea why these comic book artists, especially from the Golden Age, had no idea how to draw children. They just drew small, middle-aged people and called them kids. And the coloring is so sloppy. There's like no coloring whatsoever. Everything is outside the lines and inside other characters. Coloring comic books back in the Golden Age is actually a very laborious, time-consuming process, and the colors bleeding like this is a very common thing. But when you look at Bucky's face here, it's just one peach blob underneath all this black ink. And this is one of the times where I genuinely mean it. He looks awful, but as far as comic book history is concerned, this panel says a lot. Now in 1951, Timely Comics would rename themselves to Atlas Comics, but we're not going to talk about any Atlas Comics right now. We're going to scoot all the way to 1961, where they renamed themselves again to Marvel Comics, and this is the Silver Age. So we're going to go to the Avengers number 4 for Captain America's debut in the Silver Age as Captain America joins the Avengers. If you have your hands on this copy, you probably spent somewhere in the ballpark of $5,000 for it. And this comic book is Silver Age Stan Lee, Jack Kirby. This is where I believe that modern comic books, the way we know them today, were built and developed. And these two guys are the guys that blueprinted the entire thing, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, although I give Jack Kirby a lot more of the credit. But it's in this book we actually see how Bucky dies. Because you remember earlier where I said that Bucky was shot, but he didn't die in that last issue? And we could tell that because Captain America was nursing Bucky by the bedside or whatever. Later on in history, after that, apparently Bucky did die. And the way that he died was depicted in a flashback in Avengers number 4. And here, Bucky no longer has red hair. Apparently in the flashback, Bucky had brown hair and he was more adult sized. He wasn't like a little pipsqueak or whatever, the way that he was depicted way back when. And the way that Bucky dies is that him and Captain America, while fighting in the war as their alter egos, jumped from this motorcycle to a flying plane. Steve Rogers wasn't actually able to make it all the way onto the plane, but Bucky did. The problem with that is that the plane, shortly after that, with Bucky attached to it, exploded. And that, my friends, is how Captain America lost his sidekick. Now later on, way down the line in 2004, we learn what happens just after Bucky dies. And spoiler alert, that's when the Winter Soldier stuff happened. But before we get to the Winter Soldier, we gotta go to 1965 for Tales of Suspense number 63, written by Stan Lee with pencils by Don Heck. And in this book, we get even more of the origin story of Captain America and Bucky Barnes. Bucky is drawn just like he was back in the Golden Age with his army romper and domino mask. However, now there's a clear retcon that he was never a redheaded kid. This guy was never a ginger. Bucky was always a brown-haired individual. And in the following panels, we see how Bucky became Captain America's sidekick. And it's basically because he walked in on Steve Rogers, changing into Captain America, and then he basically blackmailed him. He was like, hey, since I know that you're Captain America, and I know your deepest, darkest secret, you're gonna have to let me be your sidekick. And if not, well, I'm just gonna leak this to everybody, I guess. And then Steve Rogers is just like, I guess I have no other choice. You're gonna join me now, Bucky. And then in the next panel, they're just superheroes now, fighting bad guys together. But it's only because Bucky had this blackmail on Steve Rogers. The Silver Age was a great time for comic books. Definitely one of my favorite eras. But moving on from the Silver Age to the Bronze Age now, we're going over to 1975 for Invaders number 1. And on the cover of this thing, we don't really see a Bucky Barnes over here. But I'll tell you right now, it was written by Roy Thomas and drawn by Frank Robbins. Roy Thomas would go on to be the editor-in-chief, replacing Stan Lee in the whole Marvel hierarchy over here. But there's not much to really go into regarding the Bucky character design, not even by a long shot. He's got the romper, he's got the domino mask, but his collar is no longer yellow. Sometimes the collar's red, sometimes the collar's yellow. I'm sure there's many reasons for that, but if I was to tell you what I prefer, the red collar or the yellow collar, I'm gonna say the red collar because it looks more uniform, but the yellow collar is way more comic booky and makes Bucky Barnes stand out a whole lot more. Now this is the only issue from the Bronze Age we're gonna talk about, because after this, we're gonna scoot all the way to 1994 into the modern age, and we still don't have the Winter Soldier yet. This is just another retelling of Bucky Barnes' origin story in the one-shot called Captain America, The Medusa Effect. And on the cover, we get Bucky Barnes. Here he has brown hair, not red, a blue domino mask, not black, and a red collar. These colors are just flipping back and forth, and I'm not actually sure that it's intentional. But if we flip open the book, and on this splash page over here, we get another detail that's just added for some reason. Back in the day, around the waist of the romper was a red belt. Sometimes it wasn't colored and left white, but here it's black with a white buckle, but that's not actually the detail that I want to mention. The detail that I want to mention are these red buttons all of a sudden. Now I'll have to go back. Were they always red? And after going back, I'm realizing no, they weren't always red, but they're red here now for some reason with no yellow collar. But this is going to be the last time we see Bucky Barnes looking like Bucky Barnes, because in 2005, we get another Captain America ongoing. And to start it off, they hit us with an arc called Out of Time. And in part 1, we started to get teases of Bucky Barnes being the Winter Soldier, but it wasn't revealed until issue 6 that this is Bucky Barnes and he is now the Winter Soldier. He's an operative for the Soviets, and he's going to be hunting down Captain America. This was written by Ed Brubaker with art by Steve Epting, and they're both credited as being the creators of the Winter Soldier. And in it, there's a retelling of that moment where Bucky Barnes dies when he jumps onto the plane, his arm gets stuck, the plane blows up. And apparently after that happens, these Soviets over here in a submarine, they find him, they take him back, and he's missing an arm. They revive Bucky Barnes, they create this bionic arm for him, and they send him out on assassin missions, and they keep him frozen in between assassin missions. One of these missions has him going after his old boss, Captain America. And I gotta say, I love how they kept the domino mask on him, because that little bit of DNA from the Bucky Barnes character carrying over to the Winter Soldier is one thing that really ties these two character designs together. But now we got a brooding, dark assassin. No more is this guy a Boy Scout. No more is this guy a golly gee shucks kind of guy. He's staring down the sight of a sniper rifle. And here we get a very clear shot of his bionic arm. This arm can do so many things, and it really is the source of his superpower. But we see it's just a metal arm with a big red star on the shoulder, and it looks like he's just dressed in all black with maybe a bulletproof vest and some army boots. But I would be an idiot if I left out the one big detail that makes this guy the Winter Soldier and not Bucky Barnes, and that's the long hair. Oh, and he's like an adult. In 2006, we get this throwback cover for Captain America number 14, where we see the juxtaposition of the old Bucky character with the new Winter Soldier right there, side by side. We can see this entire evolution right here on this cover, and it's awesome. Bucky Barnes, back then, red hair with yellow collar, and now apparently yellow buttons on his romper, juxtaposed with the Winter Soldier, who's big and muscular, long hair, big thick jaw, metal arm, pouches, holsters, guns, and boots. And inside the book, such a dark, brooding character. No longer bright and colorful, no primary colors being splashed on this guy whatsoever. He's been brainwashed and manipulated, and sometimes the memories just come flooding back to him. Because back in the day, he was just an orphan that got taken into the Fort Lee Army Center and used as a mascot. He went from being an army mascot to being a superhero sidekick, all the way to a Soviet weapon, manipulated and sent on missions. But he would be able to get out of his bad guy arc, and by 2012, Winter Soldier got his own story. His own title came out on Marvel, written by the same guy that just did that Captain America run that I talked about, Ed Brubaker. And on all these covers, we can see even a little bit more of an evolution of Bucky Barnes. Muscles, guns, babes, rain, smoke, fire, debris. Really dark and serious type stuff. This guy wants you to forget that he was once just some low-level sidekick. And then in 2014, Bucky gets another series called Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, and apparently in this one, he goes to space. Because here's Space Bucky, looking exactly the way the Winter Soldier has looked in those previous issues, but now he's got this big space helmet on, a bunch of tubes and structures strapped to his back, and his gun is gigantic. This run was written by Alice Cott, with art by Marco Rudy, and it's getting definitely mixed reviews. I only read one issue of it and I was very confused. But as far as character evolution goes, Space Bucky is definitely notable, and I would love to see Space Bucky in Marvel Rivals. Oh, speaking of Marvel Rivals, let's scoot a whole decade after that, and let's talk about the Winter Soldier from Marvel Rivals. This might be the best Winter Soldier out of all the Winter Soldiers that have been designed. I love the army green that's being used as his primary color because he's an army guy. On the vest, it's lined with this fur, which I find to be hyper realistic. He's got the long hair, but no longer is he wearing the domino mask. The domino mask has been transitioned into this lower face covering, which all makes him feel more militaristic. This guy feels like a hired gun by the military. And I would love to say this is my favorite Bucky Barnes of all time, but it's not. My favorite Bucky Barnes of all time actually comes in Marvel Rivals, but it's not the Winter Soldier skin. It's the Bucky skin. Now this thing is like a hybrid of his two big iterations. He's basically the Winter Soldier here, a big muscular adult man with a bionic arm capable of so many different things, but He's dressed exactly the way that Bucky Barnes was dressed in the Golden Age. He's got the domino mask, he's got the romper, he's got the red tights, the boots, and the gloves. To me, in my opinion, this is peak Bucky Barnes, and I'm actually feeling so much regret for not getting the battle pass last season in order to grind for this skin. I hate that I don't have it. But since I'm not really a Bucky player, I didn't drop the cash, but I wish I did for the sake of this video now. But the Bucky Barnes Winter Soldier skin is absolutely peak Winter Soldier in my opinion. You might not agree with that. You might have other Bucky Barnes skins in this game that you prefer more than this. The comic book creators create iconic stuff that cannot be with, and a lot of the times that is the case. But sometimes superhero media outside of the comic books swoops in and they just nail it, and this is just an example of that. Bucky Barnes was absolutely crushed, knocked out of the park by the developers over there at NetEase and Marvel Rivals. So that, my friends, is the 85-year Winter Soldier comic evolution. Until my next upload, watch another upload. Okay, goodbye, see you later, and have a good one or whatever.